Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It has been a really long time since I was here making a video, so I took an unplanned impromptu pause away from BookTube over the summer, not for any bad reasons, like everything was fine, there was no poor mental health, there was no, it was nothing at all negative. For anyone who has not been here for a long time, the setup that I use to record BookTube videos is minimalistic in the extreme. I have a tripod and my cell phone, and that is it. I record my videos in my basement, and I don't have any extra lighting, so I basically have to record in the daytime, and that's it. And so I have two school-aged kids, and I need them to not be home because they are also not very mildly tempered little children. They're very, very energetic, and they love letting you know everything that is happening, that is going on in the course of your day. So it really needs to be an empty house for me to record. And so once the summer came, I found that the only time that I was able to record was either when they were doing something fun, which meant that I was missing out on the something fun, or I was trying to really quickly record things while they were out playing with their friends and kind of hoping that they wouldn't burst into the house with a frog or a cut or something that needed to either be shown off or tended to. And it just became really stressful. And then recording videos became something that was not fun because I felt like there was this layer of urgency that went along with it, and it was not enjoyable. And so I thought, you know what, I will just take a pause for the summer. I was able to do some live shows and kind of hop onto some streams with friends because I do streaming in the nighttime. It's just that, everybody else looks great in the stream and I look like I'm in a cave, which is fine because that's basically how I spend my nights, is in a dark cave. But I didn't really have plans for this, so I didn't put out any announcements or anything like that. But the kids are back in school. I am back to being able to record in my empty house when they are not here, and I'm really looking forward to putting some videos out this fall and kind of continuing on with a regular schedule. The hope right now is to be able to post twice a week, and I'm thinking that I'm going to be able to stick to that schedule barring any, family emergencies or whatever. But for everybody who commented on videos, sent messages on Instagram, messaged me on Discord or Voxer or whatever you did over the last couple of months, thank you for checking in. I definitely missed talking to everybody. I missed being right in the thick of things on BookTube, but it was also really nice to have a break. There are only so many summer vacations that you spend with your kids when they're little, and we had a really fantastic summer. So I do not regret kind of stepping away from making videos over the summer, but I also am very excited to be back, and I have lots of fun things that I want to talk about in the coming months. But for today, for the welcome back video, I thought I would do something very simple. All I'm going to do is talk about 6 books that I read over the summer. These are kind of my 6 favorite books that I have read in no particular order over the summer months, and just wanted to share some of my thoughts with all of you because I'm not going back to record a June wrap up and a July wrap up and an August wrap up and all those things. I will get back to regular TBRs and wrap ups now, but otherwise I just wanted to give my thoughts on some of these books. So the very first one is technically a series, but I'll talk about book 1 in the series, and that is the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. This is a series that I binge read and listened to because I did partially by audio, partially reading this summer, and it was so good. The Locked Tomb series is one that is very polarizing. There's a lot of dissenting opinions, not just on BookTube, on Goodreads, anywhere that you read reviews for books. There are going to be some people who love the Locked Tomb series, and then there are going to be some people who are like, this is just weird and confusing, and I don't understand how anybody likes it. And I think that both those things are valid, but I'm really happy that I fall in the I love it category. Full disclosure, the final book, the 4th and final book, comes out next year. And if the landing, if she sticks the landing, if the book is what I am looking for, if it meets the expectations that I have for the series, this will absolutely make it to one of my top 10 series of all time. I love it. I love it. I am having so much fun. I've had the best time reading these 3 books. And they're so difficult to summarize. I think, going to try to do a review of this series. And I'm also going to be doing a group discussion. So we're just in the planning stages of that. We're trying to hammer down a date, but there are a couple booktubers who want to get together and talk about this series, so hopefully I'll be able to announce that or link you to the channel that's going to take place on before too long. But it's such a difficult series to sum up, and the tagline that often gets used is lesbian necromancers in space, and that definitely fits. Like, there are lesbian necromancers in space, but it is so much more than that. This series is so unique in terms of plot and structure and prose and narrative framing and characterization. It's really unlike anything else that I have ever read, and I love it so much. The first book, which is really the only one that I can give a summary of, it's kind of like a locked room murder mystery. You have our two main characters whose names are Gideon and Harrow Hark. And I listened to this on audio, and the narrator, Moira Quirk, who, by the way, was fabulous, did an amazing job, narrates it with a, quasi-British accent. And I honestly thought that the character's name was Harrow Hawk the entire first book. And then I opened the second book to read it physically and was like, Harrow Hark? What? Had no idea. Anyway, that's irrelevant because everybody calls her Harrow anyway. But Gideon and Harrow both live on a planet where Harrow is the daughter of their kind of like ruling couple, their priestess and priest ruling couple. And Gideon is a child who has been taken in. So she's not really of this people, but she has been raised. She's kind of like a ward of the state and has been raised in this environment. And there are very few children who grew up on this planet. So Gideon and Harrow had grown up together, and they despise each other. Gideon wants nothing more than to escape this planet, to go off, to join this kind of like ongoing battle that's taking place across space. She wants to join the forces, and she keeps trying to escape, and she keeps getting stopped. And this has been going on for years and years and years. And so at the beginning of the novel, Harrow comes to her with a deal. She says, I have to go off. I've been invited to attend this symposium at another planet. Please come with me. If you come with me, I will grant you your freedom, and you can leave and go join the army and do whatever it is that you want to do. So Gideon agrees to go along with Harrow, and they arrive at this planet. They have been invited along with pairs from all of the other houses. So Gideon and Harrow are from the 9th planet. They're from the 9th house. And so houses 1 through 8 also arrive with 2 kind of ambassadors for each one. And when they arrive, weird stuff starts happening. So people start getting killed. There are mysteries to solve. You don't know who's a friend, what's happening, who's the bad guy, what's the ultimate goal, and you are left in the dark for a really long time. So one thing I will say about this series, and it only intensifies as you go on, is that you have to be okay with not understanding what's going on. Like, if you are someone who reads a book and you need to know, like if you need to have some sort of structure, some sort of idea of what's going on in your head, you want it to feel organized and like you are following some sort of structure that has been put together for you, don't even read it. Don't even pick it up. There's no point to pick it up because these are absolutely off the wall. Like, you will be thinking in one direction and something will come in and like blow all of those thoughts up, and it's just, you just have to be willing to sit there and let the book take you along for the ride. And I love that. I think it is, some of these books, especially book 2, is one of the most confusing books that I've ever read in my life, but I loved it. And when it all came together, I was like, this is amazing. So anyway, I'm very excited about this series. I cannot wait for the last book to come out. I will definitely reread it. I have read all of them via like ebook or audiobook from the library, so I'm going to buy them. I want to own them. It is, like I said, if the 4th book meets my expectations, if I feel like it does a good job in wrapping the series up, it will absolutely make it to my favorite series of all time. So there's my plug for the Locked Tomb series. Gonna have a discussion with that about that with some other booktubers coming up soon. The second book that I read this summer that I really, really loved was a work of nonfiction. And this is a book that I've had sitting on my shelf for a little while. And that's the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. So I was a big fan of John Green's young adult novels when he was publishing them. I used to read a lot more YA about like 10 years ago, which was around the same time that he was publishing YA novels, and I really liked them. I liked his style. I thought they were very easy to read. There was lots of interesting characters, and I did think that they resonated. Like the themes were always really well done. I had this work of nonfiction for several years and had never ever picked it up. I have not followed along, like I haven't been someone who has followed along with John Green's YouTube career. So I know he has a channel that he started with his brother where they would do these vlogs kind of back and forth to each other. And then I think that expanded into a series of educational YouTube shows where they offer up free educational material that covers like high school curriculum, university curriculum, lots of different topics. So I think they've done some really good and interesting things for, the people of the internet, but I had not followed along with that part of his career very closely. So all of the information in this book, which is a collection of essays, was new to me. I think that he has talked about similar topics on his YouTube channel and on podcasts and various things. So if you are someone who follows him very closely, then maybe these would already be some things that you would know. But basically what John Green has attempted to do with this book is give a review of the Anthropocene, which is our human era on Earth. So like the recorded history of humanity or humankind. And he reviews things from Dr. Pepper, Diet Dr. Pepper, to Mario Kart, to cave paintings in France, to modern artwork. Like there are some things that are very silly and some things that are very profound. But I found myself really touched. Like I thought that this was gonna feel gimmicky or put on, and maybe it will to some people, but I just thought that it was really beautiful and really moving. One thing that John Green and his brother have always been big, I guess, defenders of is the ability for people to be unironically fans of things, like for people to be happy or to have their emotions or to think things are cool and to not feel ashamed or belittled by that. So a lot of what happens in this book is really optimistic. Like a lot of the things he talks about, he has a very optimistic outlook on life and humanity, which sometimes is at odds with the very intense anxiety disorder that he suffers from. So he talks about how he reconciles those two things, how long it took him to get from an adolescent, a young adult who felt very negative and very pessimistic about the world and the future and our place in it, to a person who is able to be more hopeful and is able to appreciate things about the world a little bit more. Obviously, this comes from the very narrow lens of John Green, who is a successful, white man living in America who has a very different type of existence than lots of people all, across the world. But I still think that it was worthwhile. I think that he is able to acknowledge the things that make his life easier and also some of the things that have made his life more difficult. And I think he did a really good job of that. I was not expecting this book to affect me as much as it did, and it made me cry a couple of times. I also listened to this one via audio, and he narrated it himself, and I just thought it was really lovely. So if you would like to listen to some nonfiction, if you enjoy listening to audiobooks, or even if you just want a short book to read, because like I said, this is a collection of essays that you can go through pretty quickly, I really do think it's worth your time. It was a big surprise for me this summer. Was not expecting to like it as much as I did. And it might end up being one of my favorite books of the year. Obviously, we've still got a little bit of the year left, but it is certainly one of the books that I have read this year that has had the biggest positive impact on me. So I was really, really glad to read that one as well. The third book that I wanted to talk about is a fantasy romance called The Binding. So this is a book that I picked up, who knows, a few years ago based on the cover. It is a beautiful cover. It looks kind of old-fashioned and literary, which makes sense because the whole premise behind this book is that there is a young man who lives on his parents' farm, and he has a fascination with books, but has also been told by his family that books are other, basically. They're not evil, but they're things that should be avoided, that you should not read, that you should not look into. And the reasons behind that are veiled in shadow. And I personally think that the back of this book is a little bit spoilery and will give you too much information. I think that you should know very little going into this book. You should know that it involves fantasy in a way that feels like it could be magical realism. Like the magic is rooted in the written word and books and memory and perception. But it does feel a bit like magical realism at times. You should know that it's a romance, so if you're not interested in romance, definitely don't read it. But I think that's all you should know. If you want a book that feels mysterious, with lyrical language, with a heartbreaking romance that is going to pull you through, then just go read it. I'm not going to tell you anything else about it. I wish that I had not read the back of this book because I wanted to discover everything as I went through. I understand why they need to have a blurb on the back. They obviously need to pull people in. But for anybody who likes fantasy romance, who likes books that feel like historical fantasy, this isn't historical fantasy because it's set in a different world, but it feels like that. Kind of feels like Victorian historical fantasy. Then just go read it. It was lovely. I read it in one sitting. And it felt so good because it had been a long time since I binge read a book like that. And I was just, and I started it at, we brought our kids out of town for summer camp. So they went to summer camp for a week and Andrew and I hung out at like this really beautiful Airbnb in the woods. So it was really nice because they went out for summer camp for 6 hours during the day. Andrew and I hung out and then we all went and did like family stuff afterwards. So it was a really good week. But I started it at 11 o'clock at night, right before I was about to go to bed. I was like, I'll read one chapter of this. 4 o'clock in the morning, I finished that book. And I just couldn't stop. I was like, I don't want to. I don't want to sleep. I do not want to sleep. Poor Andrew, he obviously drove the kids to camp that morning and I stayed in bed. But it was worth it. It was great. I, again, highly recommend to anybody who enjoys fantasy romance. The big blockbuster hit of the summer that I read was Lightbringer by Pierce Brown. And I didn't want to let this one go by without talking about it. I thought I was going to record a review, but so many people have recorded reviews, so I don't even know if there's any point. If you would like to see a review of Lightbringer, then feel free to let me know, but I don't know if I will end up getting to that or not. I read Lightbringer, and especially after having had a really negative reaction to Dark Age, I gave Dark Age 2 out of 5 stars, which I know so many people love Dark Age, but I just did not. I did really enjoy it. It was not my favorite. I think I still like the books of the original trilogy more than I like the books of the follow-up series. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I thought that Lightbringer was extraordinarily well plotted. I thought the characters were excellent. I loved reading what they went through. It was very exciting. It was classic Pierce Brown. What I found in Dark Age is that it was a weird pacing. Like I would feel super invested and then the brakes would go on and then super invested. And then it was just like the whole time I felt like I had whiplash from reading it because I would want to read it really badly. And then it would be so boring and I didn't care what was happening. I thought that Lightbringer. Lightbringer was excellent from start to finish. It was very well paced. I always wanted to be reading it. I was really happy to be back with these characters. I loved what he did with some of their character arcs. And I'm really, really excited for the last book. So really enjoyed it. What I personally think is that Pierce Brown's abilities as an author and the direction that he has taken this series in has outgrown the format that he used for the original trilogy. So the original trilogy is kind of like this high octane, bombastic, plot-driven sci-fi space opera. You are expecting the big battles and the rousing speeches and the big gestures, and that's what it is. What Pierce Brown is doing now is a lot more political. There's a lot more thought. Not that there were political movements, and the first 3 books were also well plotted. I love them, but I just think that he has taken it a step higher in Lightbringer, and the first person present point of view, that short, choppy style, I feel like it doesn't fit anymore. So when I'm reading it, there's a dissonance between the way that the story is written and the story that I am getting, and it just makes it a little bit jarring for me. I just think that this would work better in a more classic writing style. And I do think Pierce Brown could do that. His writing, his plotting, I think everything has grown with him as he has continued his career. I am super looking forward to what he's doing next. I would still count this amongst one of my favorite series of all time. It's just that I don't think that the style and the content really match up anymore. And it makes for like a little bit of a discombobulating reading experience. But I did really enjoy it. I wanted to get back with all these characters. I love the time that I got to spend with them. And like I said, I'm really, really looking forward to the concluding novel of that series. So I can't complain about Lightbringer. I was a little bit nervous about whether or not I was going to like it when I got into it, but I ended up really, really loving it. So that was great. The last new series, because the last book that I'm going to talk about was a reread for me, but the last new series that I was reading over the summer that I really loved was 20th Century Boys. So I finally got back into reading this. This is a manga series that I started with Patrick and Alan 2 years ago maybe, and then we had taken a break from it. Then I went and read Monster with Alan. Well, Alan had watched the Monster anime, I think, before going into the chat too, but with Alan and Jimmy, and we had a great conversation about it. It's by the same author, and 20th Century Boys, whereas Monster is kind of like a psychological thriller / murder mystery cat and mouse kind of story. 20th Century Boys is a coming of age sci-fi mystery, and it's really good. I'm so sad that I took a pause from it for so long. I had been reading through. I was hopeful that I would finish the whole series in September, and that still might happen, but it might not. It might carry over like for a final volume or two into October, but I am having a great time with 20th Century Boys. Such a talented storyteller, and I'm just loving everything that I read in this series too. And then the very last book that I wanted to talk about was an old favorite that I went back and reread, and that is Swordspoint by Ellen Kushner. I've talked about this a couple of times on the channel, but I just wanted to kind of announce that I have reread it, and I loved it as much as I did the first time that I read it. So Swordspoint is also, I think it's got like a subtitle, or at least like the tagline that gets used most often is A Fantasy of Manners. And it's basically if you took like Jane Austen and classic fantasy and mushed them together. What you have is a swordsman named Richard St. Vere who lives in this kind of like little slum area of a town called Riverside. So he lives down in Riverside, and then there's the kind of like affluent area across the bridge, across the water, up on the hill. And so all of the people with money live up on the hill, and all of the people who have no money live down in Riverside. And so he lives down there, and he is hired by the nobility to fight duels of honor for them. So if they have a problem with someone, if they want to take out a political rival, they're not going to debase themselves by, planning something or attacking someone or doing anything like that. They will hire a swordsman to come and challenge them to a duel. And then obviously that other nobleman has the chance to either fight for themselves or to hire their own swordsman. And so Richard St. Vere is the most famous and the most talented of all these swordsmen. And he is hired by a man at the beginning of the novel that kind of like sets a cascade of events into motion. And it's really, really good. If you like, I would say you have to like classic literature and you have to like low fantasy, because the only thing that is fantastic about Swordspoint is the setting. There's no magic, or if there is, it's only talked about in very vague terms. Like no one uses any magic. It just takes place in a world that doesn't exist. And there's a lot of not even political intrigue, a lot of petty court intrigue. So just a lot of nobles insulting each other and then not realizing that they're being insulted, and then having these kind of like petty feuds and squabbles. And then you have Richard St. Vere in the middle of all of it. And Richard has his own issues. He is in the midst of what is a very difficult and like a very challenging romantic relationship with a man who is really not well in terms of his mental health. And so it is this kind of explosive relationship with the background of all of this courtly intrigue happening. And I had read it a really long time ago. I think like it stood out to me back then for a couple of reasons. I was a teenager when I read it, and it was the first fantasy novel that I had read with anyone who was like a bisexual character, which was a big deal back at that time. There's a lot more representation now, but that was something that was not done at all back then. Or if it was, you know, it was more difficult to seek out a book. You couldn't really look for a book that had that in it. Low fantasy was not something that I had read a lot. So it was, again, like a different fantastic setting than anything else I had read at that time. And it was, I think, in terms of prose and conversation, a more highbrow fantasy book that I was used to reading when I read it in my late teens, because I had read a lot of like sword and sorcery, classic type fantasy, and really loved it. So when I read Swordspoint for the first time, it was so different than anything else I had read. And I have read other fantasy books now as an adult that are more akin to that. So I wondered when I went back and read it for the second time, like, would I still like it as much as I did back then? And I did. I really loved it. Still absolutely a 5-star read for me. And I'm going to continue with the companion novels. Actually, I'm going to be reading one this month, and then probably will read the next one before the end of the year. But I've never read the companion novels, and I thought after rereading Swordspoint, it was finally time to get to them. So if you haven't read Swordspoint, I think that it is a wonderful piece of classic fantasy. Neil Gaiman really loves it. George R.R. Martin really loves it. So if you don't trust my opinion, then you could definitely take their opinions into consideration and think about adding it to your TBR. I'm trying to convince Alan to make Swordspoint and its 2 companion novels one of his group read-alongs for next year, because then people will definitely, climb on board and join the reading train. So we'll see if I can convince Alan to make that happen. But that's it. Those are a collection of my favorite books that I read over the summer. Please tell me what you've been up to. What have you been reading over the summer? What do you look forward to? Like, what are you looking forward to reading? How was your summer? You can tell me something fun that you did over those couple of months. If you want to feel like you're back in school, tell me what happened in summer vacation. But I will see you with another video soon. Bye.